on Mr. Lipinski's question. Mr. George, if the IG says that even at the lower risk level, the IRS process is not NIST compliant, is that correct?
Repeat your question?
If the IG says that, yeah, so if you say that at the lower risk level, the IRS process is not NIST compliant, is that what you're saying?
It is correct, because they were not requiring the additional information that NIST requested or mandated.
Okay. Let me get to some other questions. First, we do want to thank you all for being here. The federal government certainly does have a massive cybersecurity problem, as we've seen most visibly with OPM data breach. We need to be doing more across the board to prevent, identify, and thwart cybersecurity attacks. I had the opportunity to visit the Department of Energy cybersecurity team at Germantown and to get a crash course on the bad actors that exist. I also saw how easily a company or agency can find itself vulnerable. NIST develops the guidelines that all federal non-defense agencies must follow. For industry, they are minimal, a voluntary floor for our security. And it seems to me, however, that an agency can just ignore these rules, placing massive amounts of sensitive private information on my constituents at risk. Mr. Koskinen, if I can address this to you, in a regular business, someone is usually responsible to accomplish their task and are held responsible for their failure to do so. IRS, unfortunately, has an abysmal record in holding their officials accountable, as we saw with the Lois Lerner incident a few years back. If you don't get fired for discriminating against political organizations and destroying evidence, I don't know how you would ever get fired at the IRS. Mr. Wilshusen spoke about the enforcement actions at the federal government and said that he does not know that OMB has ever taken any action. I appreciate your seemingly lamenting statement about the burden of mandates, such as Obamacare, that they have on your agency, but all agencies have been strapped. And I think keeping my constituents' private information safe should be one of the highest priorities you have. What internal actions have you taken, considering you are still non-compliant with basic NIST and OMB standards?
I think we are compliant with NIST standards. As the Inspector General said, the prior authentication systems are no longer appropriate, and we agree with that and have taken those down. And in fact, with regard to go back in history about what happened in the past, the entire chain of command in the C4 issues with regard to social welfare organizations, shortly thereafter none of them were in place at the IRS. And so I don't think you can say people didn't leave, were not held accountable. But I do think it is important for people to be accountable. I am actually talking with another congressman. We have any number of people who are in fact dismissed every year. For instance, we dismiss automatically anyone who takes uses improper access to any taxpayer information, any IRS employee. We discipline employees for being in default on their taxes. We have the highest compliance rate of any federal agency by a long shot, but even then we take that very seriously. So I think it's not fair to imply that, in fact, people are not held accountable. In cybersecurity, we are dealing with a rapidly changing circumstance, fighting increasingly organized and sophisticated criminal elements around the world. We are, as you say, we regret that we've had the difficulties we've had. We've had significant successes at the same time. We value the partnerships we have with the IG and the GAO, and we're working to implement their security and suggestions as quickly as we can.
I would say certainly in the most high-profile situations, we haven't seen that accountability, and my constituents haven't, and they still are very fearful of their information. Let me address, just have a minute left, to Mr. George. In your prior testimony, Mr. Koskinen had stated that access to the GET transcript application requires multi-step authentication. Is multi-step the same as multi-factor authentication? If not, what is the difference, and could the use of the term multi-step be disingenuous, as it might confuse people into thinking they're the same?
They're the same. They're the same. So,
and if I said multi-step, multi-factor is the term of art, and that's what we're working toward.
Okay. Well, again, thank you all for being here. Appreciate your work. This is obviously an ongoing concern for our constituents. They're frightened, quite honestly, of what could happen and might happen if their information is compromised. So I want to thank you all for being there, and I'll yield back the balance of my time, and I will thank the witnesses for their testimony and the members for their questions. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional written comments and written